What if the most dangerous thing about Oscar Piastri's new McLaren isn't its speed, but the fact that almost no one noticed what McLaren actually changed? Because while rivals have been obsessing over headline numbers for 2026, insiders suggest McLaren quietly solved a much deeper problem, one that doesn't show up in lap times until it's already too late to respond. And once that solution was paired with Piastri, the mood inside the paddock shifted instantly. Behind closed doors, teams aren't asking how fast this McLaren is. They're asking how it behaves when races get messy, when pressure builds, and when others start making mistakes. That's where the concern really starts. And here's why this isn't just another development story. If what's hidden inside Piastri's new McLaren works the way some engineers quietly believe it does, then 2026 won't be about who attacks hardest, it'll be about who stays composed the longest. And once you understand why that might make Piastri genuinely terrifying, this is not a story you drift away from halfway through. Once details of this McLaren concept began circulating quietly, the reaction from rival teams was not immediate alarm, it was delayed concern. At first glance, nothing about Piastri's new McLaren looks extreme. No radical architecture. No obvious regulatory gray areas. But engineers who've seen fragments of the data describe something far more unsettling: a car designed to remain composed when conditions degrade. Not just aerodynamically, but structurally in how load is managed, how balance shifts, and how feedback reaches the driver when the limits start moving. That kind of behavior is invisible on spec sheets, but decisive over a race distance. What makes this especially worrying is that McLaren appears to have built the car around sequence, not moments. Instead of optimizing for peak grip or peak deployment, the focus seems to be on how the car transitions from one phase to the next. Corner entry to mid-corner. Mid-corner to exit. Clean air to dirty air. As races get chaotic, most cars become harder to read. This McLaren, according to insiders, becomes easier. And that inversion of difficulty is exactly what turns close competition into psychological pressure. Inside rival garages, the uncomfortable comparison isn't about raw pace. It's about error tolerance. The data suggests this McLaren absorbs small mistakes without amplifying them. A slightly missed braking point doesn't spiral into overheating. A compromised line doesn't destroy the next corner. That forgiveness allows a driver to stay aggressive without paying the usual penalties, and that's where Oscar Piastri's profile suddenly becomes very relevant. Piastri has never been a driver who relies on chaos or overdriving. His strength has always been precision under control. Give him a car that stays predictable when conditions worsen, and he doesn't need to force opportunities, he waits for them. The leaked information suggests McLaren may have built a platform that rewards exactly that kind of patience. Not explosive brilliance. Relentless accuracy. And rivals know from history how dangerous that combination becomes once a driver fully trusts the machinery. There is also growing attention on how this car behaves late in races. While others are forced into protection modes, thermal, aerodynamic, or tire-related, this McLaren appears to maintain a narrower performance delta from lap 1 to lap 50. That doesn't win races in the opening laps. It wins them when others fade. And when a car fades less, the driver doesn't need to attack, the race comes to them. That's a terrifying scenario for teams used to dictating pace early. Strategically, this gives McLaren a weapon that doesn't announce itself. They don't need to gamble on extreme setups. They don't need to chase volatile upgrades. They can let others expose weaknesses while refining a concept that already behaves the way engineers want it to. Under the cost cap, that restraint is powerful. It shifts pressure outward, forcing rivals to overextend just to keep the gap stable, and overextension is where championships quietly unravel. And this is why the biggest secret of Piastri's new McLaren is genuinely scary. Because it doesn't suggest dominance through speed. It suggests dominance through endurance. A car designed to stay readable while others become unpredictable. A driver built to exploit exactly that environment. If this concept behaves on track the way insiders believe it does, then 2026 won't be remembered as the year McLaren surprised everyone. It will be remembered as the year people realized too late that they were racing a car designed not to win loudly, but to wait until everyone else made the mistake first. As more pieces of this McLaren project begin to surface, the anxiety inside rival teams is starting to sharpen rather than fade. The concern now isn't whether Piastri's McLaren is quick, it's whether it's immune to the kinds of problems that usually reset the competitive order mid-season. According to insiders, this car wasn't designed to chase perfect conditions. It was designed to remain functional when conditions stop being perfect. That sounds subtle, but in a regulation era expected to produce instability, it's a profoundly aggressive philosophy. It assumes chaos is inevitable and plans to exploit it rather than avoid it. What's particularly unsettling is how this philosophy changes McLaren's development curve. When a car degrades gracefully instead of sharply, engineers can afford to push updates without fear of catastrophic side effects. Correlation improves. Learning accelerates. Rival teams, by contrast, are still building layers of protection around fragile concepts. That means every update carries risk, every step forward threatens 2 steps back. If McLaren has already escaped that phase, then the real gap may not appear early, it may open when others start slowing down. Inside other garages, there's growing recognition that this McLaren may be unusually resistant to pressure-induced errors. As races tighten, drivers tend to overdrive unstable cars. That's when tires overheat, balance collapses, and strategies unravel. A forgiving car does the opposite. It encourages confidence. It allows a driver to stay within themselves even when being chased or defending. Oscar Piastri, known for his composure rather than aggression, becomes far more dangerous in that environment than raw lap time comparisons would suggest. There is also increasing attention on how this car behaves in traffic. Most designs lose clarity when following closely. Dirty air destabilizes balance, thermal margins shrink, and feedback becomes inconsistent. According to internal analysis, McLaren has focused heavily on how the car communicates loss of grip to the driver. Not eliminating it but making it readable. That readability allows drivers to lean on the car without crossing into unpredictable behavior, a trait that becomes decisive in wheel-to-wheel racing late in stints. Strategically, this shifts how McLaren can approach entire weekends. They don't need to chase a perfect qualifying lap to protect Sunday. They don't need to compromise race trim for Saturday glory. A car that stays predictable across conditions allows the team to aim for repeatability rather than spikes. Under cost cap constraints, repeatability is power. It lets one team extract value every weekend while others oscillate between highs and lows that average out to nothing. What makes this especially uncomfortable for rivals is that this advantage doesn't invite a clear response. You can't protest it. You can't copy it quickly. You can't even clearly measure it until it's already affecting results. By the time the pattern becomes obvious, the underlying design choices are years old and irreversible. That's why the reaction has been quiet rather than loud, because everyone understands how late in the process they already are. And this is where the real threat of Piastri's new McLaren becomes clear. Not because it promises domination, but because it promises control in an era where control is supposed to be rare. A car that stays calm. A driver who thrives in calm. A philosophy built around letting others defeat themselves. If this project behaves on track the way insiders believe it will, then the shock of 2026 won't come from a single race or a sudden breakthrough. It will come slowly, as teams realize they aren't losing to speed. They're losing to a car and a driver who were built to wait until everyone else blinked first. As the implications of this McLaren concept continue to unfold, a deeper and more uncomfortable truth is starting to emerge inside rival camps. This car doesn't just cope with instability, it appears to normalize it. Most teams are still designing around the assumption that performance will fluctuate wildly as conditions change. McLaren's leaked data suggests they questioned that assumption entirely. Instead of fighting instability, they focused on how the car responds after grip is lost, after balance shifts, after things stop going to plan. That focus fundamentally changes how races are lived from inside the cockpit. What makes this especially unsettling is that this behavior can't be activated or switched off. It's structural. It's built into how loads are transferred, how the platform settles, how feedback reaches the driver through the steering and throttle. Rivals are beginning to realize that even if they match McLaren's peak performance, they may never match how forgiving this car is when pushed beyond comfort. And in modern Formula One, races are rarely won inside comfort zones. They're won in moments when everyone else is slightly over the limit. Inside other teams, this has triggered an uncomfortable admission. Cars that are difficult to drive don't just punish mistakes, they create them. A nervous rear, an unpredictable front, a sudden thermal spike forces drivers into defensive habits. The leaked information suggests Piastri's McLaren does the opposite. It invites commitment. It encourages flow. And when a car encourages flow, a driver like Piastri doesn't need to overdrive to be fast, he simply becomes relentless. There is also increasing concern about how this concept behaves across a full season rather than isolated races. A car that degrades gently places less stress on components, tires, and even drivers. That means fewer compromised weekends. Fewer emergency fixes. Fewer reactive upgrades rushed through under pressure. McLaren's philosophy appears to be built around consistency of operation rather than headline spikes. And consistency, over 24 races, has a way of quietly dismantling more spectacular but fragile projects. From a strategic perspective, this changes how McLaren can respond to rivals' moves. They don't need to mirror aggressive updates immediately. They can observe, measure, and respond selectively. A stable platform gives a team the luxury of choice, and choice is rare under a cost cap. Rivals, by contrast, are often forced into copying or countering just to stabilize their own concepts. That reactive posture is exhausting, expensive, and rarely sustainable. What's perhaps most worrying is how well this car appears to match Piastri's psychological profile. He is not a driver who needs drama to perform. He thrives on clarity, on repeatability, on being able to execute lap after lap without surprises. Give him a car that behaves the same way on lap 45 as it does on lap 5, and he becomes increasingly difficult to unsettle. That's not a trait that produces viral moments, it produces results that feel inevitable by the time you realize what's happening. And this is why the biggest secret of Piastri's new McLaren is genuinely frightening for the rest of the grid. Because it doesn't rely on catching others out with innovation. It relies on letting others expose themselves through instability. A car designed to stay readable. A driver built to exploit readability. A philosophy that assumes pressure will break things, just not their things. If this concept delivers on track the way insiders believe it will, then 2026 won't be remembered for sudden dominance or dramatic swings. It will be remembered as the season where one car and one driver quietly waited, stayed intact, and let everyone else lose patience first. As this picture becomes clearer, another layer of unease is spreading through the paddock, and it has less to do with performance than with inevitability. Rival teams are starting to realize that McLaren's approach with Piastri isn't designed to win arguments in the garage or headlines in the media. It's designed to win process. A car that behaves predictably removes friction from every decision a team makes across a weekend. When friction disappears, execution sharpens. And sharp execution, repeated relentlessly, is often more destructive than outright speed in a tightly regulated era. What's especially unsettling is how this philosophy neutralizes one of Formula One's most powerful weapons, pressure. Pressure normally forces mistakes, rushed setups, over-aggressive strategies, drivers pushing beyond what the car can give. But a car that remains readable under stress doesn't amplify pressure, it absorbs it. That flips the dynamic of a race. Instead of McLaren reacting to rivals, rivals begin reacting to McLaren's refusal to crack. And once that happens, the psychological battle quietly tilts in one direction. Inside rival engineering departments, there's growing concern that this McLaren concept may have eliminated a class of problems others are still budgeting for. Thermal instability late in stints. Balance shifts that force setup compromises. Driver feedback that becomes vague as tires degrade. McLaren's leaked data suggests these issues don't disappear, they simply arrive more gradually and more predictably. That predictability allows engineers to plan rather than improvise, and planning always beats improvisation over a long season. There is also an emerging fear about how this affects McLaren's upgrade efficiency. When the base platform is calm, updates don't need to fix problems, they only need to enhance strengths. That means fewer wasted development cycles, fewer dead-end concepts, fewer costly rollbacks. Rivals know how rare that situation is at the start of a new regulation era. If McLaren truly has that stability now, then its development curve may stay steep long after others begin to flatten. From a driver management standpoint, this creates a powerful feedback loop with Piastri. A forgiving car builds confidence. Confidence improves precision. Precision reduces wear. Reduced wear keeps the car stable deeper into races. That loop feeds itself. And because Piastri's natural style is built around minimizing error rather than maximizing drama, he fits perfectly into that cycle. The more races unfold cleanly, the stronger he becomes relative to drivers forced into constant recovery mode. Strategically, this puts McLaren in a position of quiet leverage. They don't need to dictate pace. They don't need to provoke battles. They can allow races to evolve naturally, knowing their car is less likely to be destabilized by changing conditions. That patience forces others into action. And when others act first, they reveal weaknesses McLaren can exploit without ever needing to take the same risks. It's a form of control that doesn't look aggressive until it's already decisive. And this is why the biggest secret of Piastri's new McLaren is genuinely unsettling rather than exciting. Because it doesn't promise sudden dominance. It promises survivability in a sport where most projects fail not because they're slow, but because they're brittle. A car designed to stay intact. A driver designed to stay composed. A philosophy that assumes pressure will expose flaws, just not theirs. If this concept behaves on track the way insiders believe it will, then 2026 won't be remembered for a single breakthrough moment. It will be remembered as the season when one team and one driver quietly waited, stayed stable, and watched the rest of the grid defeat itself trying to force an answer that never came.